Okay, so welcome and thanks for joining and spending some time talking about how to start a daycare cooperative. And we want to make this pretty practical on assisting you in giving you some practical tools on how to actually start a daycare cooperative. And we have templates available and some tools and resources to go along with this. And so before we get started, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. I mean, first of all, welcome. The first thing I wanted to do before we get rolling is to acknowledge that even though this event is taking place in the virtual space, I'm acknowledging where I am, which is Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis, and which is Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And like I said, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. If you would like to, stay on and discuss that kind of thing, if you have sort of practical things that you want to ask, but feel free to ask any questions at any time in the chat, and we will endeavor to answer them as we go. And otherwise, you can also use the raise a hand function if you would like to do that as well, which is in just your bottom bar under reactions. So I just wanted to say, if this is the first time you're interacting with Co-operatives First, I want to say hi and thanks for joining. Co-operatives First is a business development organization that supports people starting all kinds of cooperatives across Western Canada. And specifically, we work with groups starting cooperatives we're focusing in on rural and Indigenous communities and cooperatives. So we're able to do this work, and primarily there's going to be no cost to anyone that we're supporting for anything or any reason. And we do this from our funder, which is Federated Cooperatives Limited. And so if you're working on a co-op, if you're working on a cooperative daycare, which is why you're here, then that's cool. Then keep in touch on that front. But if there's another kind of co-op you're working on, be in touch as well. And we can help you out with that. So this is our session today on starting a daycare cooperative as a collaboration between me and Kathy, and I'm going to introduce Kathy first. So Kathy Edwards is our entrepreneur in residence with Co-operatives First, and she's a serial entrepreneur. I say that because I can't even count all of the ventures and enterprises that she's got on the go at any one time. She loves bringing startups to life. She has both degrees in accounting and law from the University of Saskatchewan and the University of Calgary. So she's really an entrepreneur in residence, helping chart cooperatives for the path to success with their enterprise. And this is me, and I am Director of Entrepreneurship with Co-operatives First. So my background is in policy and linguistics. However, those are related. You can figure that out. I don't know. Still haven't figured it out. I love to support business startups and as they chart a path forward on their own to success, on their own terms, I should say. That is our the folks leading this discussion today. We have worked with a few projects or numerous projects on cooperative startups and on cooperative daycare startups. And so that is the focus of this sort of, I guess we're calling it an info session, because I think it's just more of like you're going to get a little more practical than maybe a typical webinar would. So Kathy, you want to kind of position this opportunity for childcare in a broader context for us, and I'm gonna click the slides for you. So go ahead.
Absolutely. So welcome everybody. So really our goal here today is to help organizations who are interested in creating a daycare co-op become investment ready. And I use the language investment ready because the federal government has provided a great deal of funding to the provinces to solve the childcare problem. And I would get you to flip to the next slide, Heather. So really the childcare issue in Canada is primarily a lack of care in a lot of rural locations. So this table was compiled by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and they were highlighting where there is a lack of access to care. And a desert under this map is defined as anywhere that there's lack of adequate access to care, irrespective of fees. So in Canada, our childcare deserts range from 2% care to 18% coverage. So in terms of actual numbers, it relates to about 776,000 non-school age children without access to adequate childcare. So the federal government has decided to take this very real problem on and provide funding through bilateral agreements. So the goal of the federal government through these bilateral agreements is to create $10 a day childcare throughout the provinces and territories by the year 2025, 2026. So if you aren't connected to childcare, this is a huge impact to parents. Childcare fees can range upwards of $900 to $1,000 a month for infant care. So realistically, what that means from an economic perspective is anyone who's in a lower wage bracket, it virtually makes no economic sense to go to work. So by rolling out this program to make accessible and affordable childcare to everyone, it is an economic game changer. The bilateral agreements, each province creates its own agreement with the federal government. So what that means is that each province is setting up its own plan with respect to how to roll out the funding. In this particular session today, we have started with the province of Saskatchewan in terms of our lens for creating our templates. However, there are a few generic elements. So if you're from other provinces, you can certainly use them as a springboard to get started, but we are working actively on creating refined templates to address all of the other provinces in Western Canada. So in really real terms, we are talking about tens of thousands of child care spaces that will be funded under these bilateral agreements. So in Saskatchewan, the primary, actually, Heather, if you want to just bring up all the points at once, awesome. The primary drivers for success in securing funding, there's really 4 key points. Number 1, in Saskatchewan, licensed spaces only. I believe that's going to be universal across the provinces. The second key factor for Saskatchewan is operating on a not-for-profit basis. So this is one distinguishing factor. In Alberta, they are establishing a mechanism where for-profit childcare can also participate in the government funding umbrellas, but there is a different subset of rules. However, if you are in Saskatchewan, it is only not-for-profit that can participate in the funding programs. And so a community services cooperative is an excellent vehicle for establishing a not-for-profit cooperative that would work well for a daycare cooperative. You have to be legally incorporated before you pursue funding. So really that's part of your planning process. And if you foresee that there could be, a period of time to get organized and established legally, you need to get that bus on the track or down the pipeline in order to apply for funding. So it's really important that you consider that very early on. Also, in terms of being successful for funding, the legwork you're going to do for planning and operational needs for your future facility and key staffing, the more advanced you are in your planning, the greater a likelihood you are to be approved for grant funding. Okay, we can move next.
Sounds good. I'm going to talk about, so in every context, in every province, cooperative, not-for-profit, community services cooperative childcare facility is eligible for this funding. So in every jurisdiction. And so there's a few things about sort of how childcare cooperatives work if you're not familiar with it. In some provinces, people would be like, oh yeah, everybody knows, and we all like Saskatchewan, they're almost ubiquitous. In Alberta, there's very few. A lot of this is just historical context. So if you're not familiar with what it is, and there is what it is, and also there's our sort of unique take on it at this moment in time. So I'm going to talk about both of those actually. So what it is cooperatives are incorporated entities. Sort of childcare cooperatives is operating on a not-for-profit basis. And parents and community members are members of the cooperative. Typically, like historical sort of cooperatives that have been set up quite a few years ago are going to be parent owned cooperatives. However, we're kind of conceptualizing a little bit different model, which includes a bit of a multi-stakeholder approach where economic development officers or town, First Nation representatives or others are part of the governance structure in order to strengthen the community approach to the daycare services, which provides, I think, a really strong, it's almost like weaving a web around childcare in your community to ensure that it has the support that it needs from all the stakeholder groups. Who are sort of affected by this, as both a place for kids to go, as an economic driver or game changer for your community, for people to get back to work. And like Kathy said, what the calculation just changes when you're going from paying almost $1,000 a month to a few $100s a month for childcare. It's just completely different, the economic calculation that people are making. And as well, if you're from a rural area, I mean, if you're not having this and the town over has it, these rates, I mean, this is a huge attraction strategy as well. So this is sort of like where we're trying to put this on the agenda at the forefront for the next couple of years as these spaces are really being created. So how cooperatives work always is the one member, one vote basis. So no person gets one more, say, so they decide to buy more shares and they get to, decide to call all the shots. The membership, which will be comprised of parents and other stakeholders, will elect a board of directors, and the board will hire a program director who will then be responsible for hiring staff. So they're like other organizations that I'm sure board hires manager, hires staff, and so on and so forth. So once you get a program director in place, a lot of the day-to-day operations are going to be devolved to that person. But in the initial setup phase, there is a good amount of legwork on the board of directors. So that's one thing to just be aware of, that there's going to be initial setup of this is going to fall to the initial membership and the directors of the organization from the beginning. So just be aware that that is on the table. But like Kathy's going to talk about, getting the program director on side early on will help as well to get things up and running and sort of get yourself from a working board to more of a policy board, although there probably will be some ongoing work as soon as possible. I wanted to talk about a couple of examples. So where we're drawing this sort of like multi-stakeholder example from specifically is a cooperative that Kathy and I just worked with to start in Maple Creek, Saskatchewan, which is a population of 2,000. So what was so exciting about this project when it was brought to us is that the approach to childcare was a more collaborative approach than I have sort of, I mean, it is a very collaborative approach. Let's just say that. The town RM and the Niconet First Nation collectively were looking at how to address the lack of childcare in their community. And it sort of just dovetailed nicely into the funding that was available right now. I don't even think that was the impetus for it. It was just like, it was sort of this perfect storm that actually ended up this way. And this really kicked us off on, wow, this is a huge opportunity. And this is a right now thing. This is like the next 2 years. This is when all these spaces are getting created. So that's why we felt we had to talk about this now. So the three stakeholders, the town, the RM, and the First Nation, kicked off or sort of incubated the idea, approached cooperatives first. After they approached us, we suggested that they get a couple of parents on side as well, or community members, to help sort of round out the governance structure. They did that very effectively, and they incorporated, including a board of parents as well as representatives from these three entities. So there's sort of being supported by other entities, I think, again, really helps to bolster the support or the community level support for this initiative as like a whole community initiative instead of just like a, putting it on parents only, for example. So, and that I think applies whether you're in a city or you're in a town or whatever. I think it's about broadening sort of the scope of the stakeholders and involving them in the governance structure somehow. So there's creating 42 new spaces, which, I mean, you look at the scale here is 42 spaces in a town of 2,000. Like, I mean, this sort of demonstrates a serious lack of spaces, and they received the initial startup funding they received was almost $500,000 to basically get this thing done right away. So the other one that I wanted to talk about is just because it's like historically, I mean, pretty impressive. So the only childcare cooperative that I'm aware of in Alberta is the Smoky Lake daycare. And we helped this one get started in 2018. So this is like pre-funding. So it just speaks to the strength of the group in order to put together this proposition and to do all the fundraising that they had to do and get donations. And I mean, this is really changing. I think that this is, with the funding available, things are going to, happen a lot more quickly than this group, because they were doing so much of the legwork themselves and raising funds and that kind of thing. So, but they started a childcare facility in Smoky Lake, which is only a population of less than 1,000, and there was no childcare, licensed childcare in this community at all. It's the only one, to my knowledge. So, again, it was multi-stakeholder. There's parents, community organizations, representative from the town and the county were all part of this. So I think that's another sort of key thing that we've identified here is sort of this collaborative approach has something really unique about it. Okay, so Kathy's going to go over the steps. Kathy personally worked on the Maple Creek concept, so she has seen the steps personally. So I wanted her to talk about how this rolls out. So take it away, Kathy.
Awesome. So realistically, what we want you to take away today is just some really practical tips and tricks to getting the ball rolling, as well as access to the resources that we've developed, which can be used with or without our assistance. So number one, as Heather alluded to, there is certainly some heavy lifting that needs to be done by a core group of people, and that's why engaging a cross section of community members is really important. Another point I'll mention on that front is that often when it's just a parent-run board, there's a lot of transition and turnover as kids age out of the facility, but really having it as a community-based facility allows for that longevity and stability, particularly that the provincial funders are looking for when they're going to be making significant capital investments. So assemble your team, and as much as possible, we've seen the success with the community-based venture. We also have, you want to get rolling on what your community needs are, and doing that by utilizing the survey tools that are available to you. The province of Saskatchewan has a survey that they use, but we'll talk about how it can be refined to be more effective. You want to incorporate, as we mentioned, that is going to be one of your inaugural steps to make sure you can be considered for funding. Then you move through to a pre-registration form phase. So after you've assembled your data and submitted for funding, we've added a step called a pre-registration form, and there's some reasons why you want to consider incorporating that into your process. And then reviewing location options. So some of the feedback we've had across the board is that location is a challenge. And so what you want to be doing is starting on that process really early on. In a lot of cases, it may require a new build of the facility because of the regulatory requirements involved in a childcare facility. Also, staffing. So what's really interesting about the Maple Creek modeling that we did is we actually included pay scales above the new minimum pay grade for ECEs, or early child care workers. And that incentivizes people to come and work at the childcare facility, which has been sort of a stumbling block in past is staffing. So we can move on. The next phase to get up and running. Again, so your fundraising. So there are a lot of grants available, but under every province, it's going to look different. So in Saskatchewan, for example, there is very significant fundraising for startup if you can qualify and secure that funding. So in Alberta, for example, the capital startup funding is less, but there is funding for expenses once you are up and operational. So considering what is available in your province will help you determine what key steps you need to undertake to get the ball rolling. And as we mentioned, trying to identify your director early on in the process will also be critical, because to get your operating license, you're going to need a number of operational policies in place, and having someone with the training and specialization to make that go smoothly and effectively is certainly advisable. And then again, just from a general cooperative and governance basis, you're going to need to have an AGM, have directors, and have board members that are trained. And again, all of this is available as tools and resources from Co-operatives First.
Thanks, Kathy. So
No problem.
Well, this is specifically how we can assist projects. So I think I've sort of mentioned this a few times, but we've taken a bit of a slightly different angle with the daycare support than sort of typically we have 3 buckets of support, which would be the incorporating or assistance with incorporating a cooperative, business planning and feasibility support, as well as governance training and support. So those are kind of our 3 pillars of support. The business planning support is the most cost intensive for us in terms of outlay of cash. And we try to do as many business plans and feasibility studies every year as we can humanly do. But, there's limitations on that. So what we decided to do in this case is actually just develop templates as we go. So this is sort of like a process where we're kind of the plane's taken off while I'm putting the stuff on a little bit, but that's how things go. But launching anything, I think. So we've created the templates for Saskatchewan because we have directly done a project in Saskatchewan that Kathy did. So she's created a template for us based in Saskatchewan. If you right now want to launch daycare right away, use that and edit it, because it will be a lot of value to you in any province. And this will work in any province. It's just that there are a little bit of differences, like Kathy said, about how the funds are being distributed. So we're sort of taking a nod from the program rollout in how we craft the financial model. And but the essence of it is the same. I mean, be legally incorporated, operating as a not-for-profit, having a multi-stakeholder approach, and talking about that and how that strong, kind of community initiative and a lot of support for the initiative are really good, and demonstrating the need. I mean, all of this is going to go a long way to securing funding for what you're working on. So like I said, we've created this sort of like light touch business plan support, I've decided to call it, which is basically we providing this template for you, which is highly customized based on a daycare cooperative that can be basically just copy and pasted to any cooperative in that regional province based on the province's rollout of the federal funding. So like I said, they're all going to be developed this year at some point. It's just when we can dedicate the resources to that. So with that, we're also going to be offering a little bit of consulting support in terms of getting sort of that outside perspective on your business plan. So I'll talk about that in a second. So in terms of incorporation, we have drafted all the templates for incorporating a co-op. I have them up on the Sask-based template, so you can just fill everything in yourself and file it. That's one way to go. The other way to go is we can offer support for any group here that is forming a cooperative that wants to incorporate in Western Canada. We can develop your templates for you and hand them over to you for you to do the filing, or we can do the filing one caveat on all of our products, is the only one you're going to hear about this, is that we charge for filing the paperwork. This is a fee of $400 to us, which is basically just passing the cost of filing on to the individual groups. The one thing you'll notice is that filing a not-for-profit cooperative is actually a lot cheaper than that in most places. This is just covering all of the costs everywhere for every kind of co-op. So if you want, we can craft all the documents for you, and then you can do your own submission if you want to register your own cooperative and pay the slightly less. I think it's Saskatchewan, it's like $75 for the name reservation and the filing fee for a not-for-profit community service co-op. So that's totally up to you. But creating those, we have the customized templates ready to go for Saskatchewan. If you want customized templates for any other province, just reach out and we will create those on an ongoing basis. It only takes like a week of turnaround, so it's not huge lag in time. In terms of the business planning support, like I said, this is sort of where I'm talking about the light touch support that we hope to offer. So we currently have Saskatchewan available. The others are coming. So what this looks like is the templates that we've created are highly customized to the unique provincial situation, the financial model, everything's built. You fill it in and give it back to us, and we'll have a look at it, and we'll have one of our consultants review it, have a meeting with you, give you some guidance on, well, if you kind of flesh this out more, this will make your application stronger. Or have you considered this? Have you included this? I think having that outside perspective on the business plan is a big value. So I didn't want to lose that completely. But I also wanted to be able to deliver as many of these as we could. So with that in mind, we have sort of a business plan review support. Give us what you have, we'll review the documents, we'll have a meeting, then you go off and do the work, and then have one more meeting with the consultant, and off you go. So it's a little bit of support for any group, but it's not quite as intensive as like a 12-week business planning engagement where you meet with a consultant every week, which is kind of intense. So anyone in Western Canada can access that support. If you're like, actually, I'm in Alberta and I really just want to start my daycare cooperative tomorrow, just reach out to us and we'll just go through our sort of normal process, if that makes sense, instead of the sort of expedited process. But I just wanted to let you know that we're creating this sort of second sort of system as well, so as many people can access the support as possible, but the other ones are still there. I feel like I'm talking about like an airline or something that has like a direct flight. It's like, you can go on the direct flight next month, or you can go on the 2-stop version this month. So, whatever, it's your pick. Okay, the final thing that we do for any group who's starting a cooperative business is governance training. So this is a customized workshop to get people off on the right foot in terms of their board capabilities, understanding what the role of directors is, basic things like we'll review kind of where you're at right now and say, like, have you bought insurance, and do you have policies around this, and all that kind of stuff. So it's basically like a consultation and a workshop for your governance. Again, like, doesn't cost anything, and you can take advantage of this up to 5 years after you incorporated. So there's sort of the consultation side of things, the topics you want to focus on, a 2-hour workshop plus a follow-up of our sort of like to-dos and templates. We also have Co-op Creator is our sort of like free online tools and resources for people starting cooperatives. So you're going to find a lot of templates there in terms of like your governance and policies, and even like templates around incorporating documents and stuff like that, and work plans for incorporating in each province. So like what we're doing with you on the sort of direct product delivery side of things is actually pretty much what you're seeing on Co-op Creator. You're just getting it delivered by us in person, if that makes sense. So this really does mirror our process. It's just the complete DIY approach. Okay, so I wanted to take a minute to talk about, I did share the link to these templates, and I would say, yeah, like, I mean, we've talked, I'm maybe ad nauseum here, but just know that there's value in this for anyone planning a cooperative in any place. Kathy's going to talk a little bit more about the sections that are in the templates, the business plan template specifically, just so that you can we can sort of help you flesh out what might go into each section. And again, feel free to ask any questions at any time if anyone has any that they are like, put in the chat or raise a hand.
All
The
right.
incorporation, this was actually my slide, wasn't it, Kathy? Yeah,
Yep.
okay. That's fine. I got it. I'm with it. Okay, so the things we're providing for each province is incorporating templates. So like I said, we have templates available, the public ones for Saskatchewan, the other ones are coming. But again, we have them already. They're on Co-op Creator that are not specifically for daycare cooperatives, but can easily be made into daycare cooperatives. There's an instruction document, so start with that and it will help you fill in the rest of it. And it's a pretty straightforward process, and we've really tailored the bylaws to be what like typically what we'll do with an incorporation is someone will fill in a survey, tell us about their co-op they're starting, and then we'll create these templates. This is basically what these templates are. You basically told us you're starting a daycare cooperative and this is roughly what it is and that kind of thing. That gives us enough information to go on to create these bylaw templates. So it's going to be like, you're going to have to fill in like the name of the cooperative and stuff like that. But otherwise they're quite a bit customized for your specific use. Okay, now it's off to Kathy.
Thanks, Heather. So the reason we took the approach of a business plan template is that in Saskatchewan, the primary driving document that the government reviews when they are considering funding is a community needs assessment form. So you'll find that in the business plan template, the sections incorporate everything you need for a community needs assessment, but it goes further than that. And it really helps you, gives you a springboard for planning in the event that you don't qualify for funding, but it still makes good sense to, if you don't get the capital funding, but it still makes good sense to create a childcare facility in your community. This business plan will be a springboard to be able to pursue either corporate funding or bank financing, should that be required. So realistically, the business plan is broken into a number of sections. Again, it's designed with the Saskatchewan lens, with the other lenses coming. There essentially are 12 sections, and each section it's really like a workbook. So you'll see a section, for example, like the executive summary, and it'll have some key points of things that you'll want to include in that section, and then give you a spot where you can fill in that template, just like you would with a workbook. If you want to create a polished, freestanding business plan, you'll just want to start a separate Word document and then use the template as sort of your skeleton or guide to create that. Then there's also the Excel workbook, which we'll dive into in a little bit more detail in terms of what content it has, but it'll really then build out your financial roadmap, which will supplement your business plan. Okay, so we'll just talk about some of the key points that you'll find in your template. The executive summary, always you'll want to be writing this last and just give that bird's eye lens and hit the high notes that you want to drive home to the reader. In the childcare business plan, you'll really want to give a good geographic overview, specifically on what area that this potential facility is going to service. So in the province of Saskatchewan, there is on the government website, you can actually type in the geographic region you're looking at, and it will bring up all of the licensed child care space facilities in that region, which is really, really a neat function, because, for example, in Maple Creek, when we are putting their documentation together to submit for the grants, we actually screen grabbed the government's website and showed that within a 50-kilometer radius of Maple Creek, there was no licensed childcare. So that was really indicative of the community need. So you'll want to describe, what region, the population base, and where the closest licensed facilities are. You also need to touch on an economic overview. And this, we don't want to only be thinking about private industry here. It's really important to think about public service and institutional offerings in your community. Because, for example, schools, hospitals, those are big institutional and economic drivers. that have a lot of staff who are going to require a lot of childcare. And why that's also important from a funding perspective is that the government is looking for long-term economic health and longevity before making that financial investment. So if you've got a school and a correctional facility in nearby and you want to service it with childcare, those institutions are probably going to be around for the foreseeable future. All right, now you can go next, Heather. All right. So in terms of current access to childcare, it's really important to not just look at licensed spaces. What the government is looking for is a complete snapshot of services in your community. So you'll want to try and get a flavor for both licensed and unlicensed care that is currently provided. A really important thing to do is communicate with those people and find out what their wait lists are and how much movement they've had on their wait lists. So for example, you might pull up on the map and see, oh, there's already a licensed facility in my region, so does it make sense to do another one? Well, you might have to have some communication with that facility and you find out that there's 35 kids on the wait list and they haven't moved up a spot in 3 or 4 years. So that's telling you that you're in a desert and probably your community needs more access to spaces. So also be sure to include Head Start programs or any of the other pre-K programs that may be run through the school system. So then you'll get in a deeper dive into your community needs by circulating a survey. So the government of Saskatchewan does have a survey template, which we have linked in our documents. But what's really interesting is that the government is also mindful of really wanting to fund childcare spaces in areas that encompass new Canadians, Indigenous communities, and vulnerable sectors. So when we took the Maple Creek project, we actually altered the government survey and asked those specific questions to find out who in the community we were servicing. And that really helped bolster their application as well. The other critical piece of information that you're going to need to capture on initial community surveys is a breakdown of the ages of children who will require care, because that really impacts your ratios. So infants require a higher number of caregivers, but also require a space allocation for a napping room, for example. So it's really important to try and get a handle on the spectrum of ages that are requiring care in your community, as that's really going to drive a big part of your planning. In terms of funding programs, so what's really interesting is when Heather was talking about the plane taking off and you're still putting the cargo on, I feel like that's kind of the scenario we have in play right now with all of the funding being made available from the various provinces. So I haven't done a deep dive of every Western province, but I can say both in Saskatchewan and Alberta that there are funding mechanisms in place, but the legislation hasn't yet been altered, or the regulations haven't yet been altered to really clarify what funding is available. So my number one tip is get in tight with whoever the representative for your geographic area is with respect to childcare licensing, because they will be a pipeline to the most current information. So in the business plan, we do have under the Saskatchewan program, all of the umbrellas of funding that are currently available. But you may also want to consider whether or not there's a large private corporation who may be interested in supplemental funding to ensure childcare for their staff, things like that. So you want to build those things into your financial plan. From an operational consideration, childcare spaces are very, very heavily regulated, both on two key criteria. Number one is staffing. So we talked about needing a director that has certain qualifications, and all of the staff likewise need a certain level of qualifications. So identifying those folks in your community early will be really important. The other important operational consideration is the facility. So in the business plan template, you will see that we have sort of the bird's eye view of the key things that your facility needs to have. So there are spatial ratios based on the number of children you're going to serve. There's a window requirement. There's little tiny toilets. So there's all of these key criteria, which allows you to really quickly and easily evaluate prospective locations as to whether or not they'll be workable. A great suggestion is if you have an elementary school in your community that is not at capacity, they already have a lot of those facility guidelines built into their existing building. And so taking advantage of some of the excess capacity is a great way to short circuit starting new or renovating. All right, we'll move on. So in terms of the financial roadmap, we've basically given you a Excel workbook, which has all of your income streams, meaning what are all of the grants that parents can qualify and that the facility can qualify for on a month-to-month basis for your revenue stream, your operating expenses, your human resources expenses, your capital needs, whether you renovate or build new, and your startup costs based on what Saskatchewan has as listed as best practice. So all of the water tables and the sand tables and the tiny chairs and the types of sleeping mats. We've built a startup spreadsheet for you to forecast all of those costs and get a really good flavor for what you need to get this facility rolling. But by no means does that replace the need for you to start and create particular financial statements for your organization once you are up and running. So once you have a good purview of your community needs, again, it's the number of kids that require care that is going to impact your whole financial workbook. So really getting those surveys circulated and back to tabulate that information and feed into your financial picture is going to be very important. So the last thing that I'll mention on this is we talk about the importance of the board and co-op members, and that's your people power. So to refer back to Maple Creek again, it was a combination of the municipality, the rural municipality, the nation, and a steering committee of parents. And we actually even had some community members who weren't going to be using the services, but they were retired teachers who wanted to be involved and felt like this was such an important community initiative. So finding your key champions early in the process, again, gives the government the assurances they need to know that if they invest in this community venture, it's going to be successful.
Thanks so much, Kathy. I think that's pretty much bringing us to the end of the presentation part of this. I'm going to give everyone the opportunity to sort of like ask questions after this, after I stop the recording, if you would like that instead. Like I said, starting a daycare cooperative, we're here to help. We have all of our regular services in terms of starting any kind of cooperatives, as well as the sort of like specialized support with the templates available for daycare cooperatives specifically. And really what we're thinking of this as is a sort of funding application readiness. So we're trying to support as many groups. What we've identified is the funding is there and it's being rolled out. But what's happening is that groups are not able to access support anywhere, that a lot of support, especially, you know, in our field of childcare cooperatives, to actually get ready to apply for that funding and to make their application as strong as it could possibly be. So that's what we're trying to do, is just to help you access that funding that's available. It's not like a guarantee or anything, but we're trying to make this path as smooth as possible for people to apply and like reduce confusion in application or like for reapplication or whatever. So we're here to help you get over that hurdle of incorporating the business or the entity, and then as well for planning the business and getting you off and running in the right direction. So if you would like to just request support, of course you have the templates and you can get back to me if you want our assistance in reviewing those and support for completing those. If you just want some generalized or personalized support, you can always fill in our request for support form, which is, I mean, if you go on our website, you'll just see in the top corner, it just says request support. But this is where it'll land you at just request-for-support after co-operatives and we can help out all cooperatives starting in the 4 Western provinces. And if you're, watching this or joining from other provinces, this is outside of our scope that we can help with direct support. But you're always free to use the templates and resources that we have. There's not going to be gated based on location. They're just going to be, we're tailoring them to those locations. That's where we work, but anyone can use them in other contexts as well. And I should mention the coopcreator.ca is an excellent source for templates and resources just for all kinds of cooperative startups. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the presentation. I'm going to stop the share and I will also stop the recording. So officially signing off on that. Thanks so much for joining, and